Living by wild ancient rules for a day. Join me as I try to live by some wild ancient rules for a whole day. Let's see if I can handle it. Have you ever stopped to think about the rules and laws that governed ancient societies? I mean, these weren't just suggestions or guidelines, these were hard and fast rules that people had to follow or face the consequences. And let me tell you, some of these ancient rules are wild, demonstrating just how different societal values were back then. Living in ancient times was tough, folks. People had to adhere to all sorts of rules and regulations that would be considered downright bizarre today. I mean, can you imagine having to follow a law that dictates how you should walk down the street or what you're allowed to wear? It's crazy to think about, but for ancient people, this was just a part of everyday life. And if you broke these rules, you'd face some serious consequences, from fines to imprisonment to even death. But what's even more fascinating is how these ancient laws reflect the societal norms of the time. They give us a glimpse into what was considered important, what was valued, and what was taboo. And let me tell you, some of these norms are just mind-boggling. I mean, have you heard of the ancient Greek law that prohibited women from attending public events, even if they were accompanied by their husbands? It's wild to think that women were essentially confined to their homes, with no say in the public sphere. In ancient Rome, there were laws that dictated how people should dress, with certain colors and fabrics reserved for the elite. Can you imagine having to follow a dress code that was imposed by the government? And if you broke these rules, you'd be seen as a rebel, someone who didn't respect the authority of the state. Of course, these laws weren't unique to Greece and Rome. Every ancient society had its own set of rules and regulations that governed daily life. And some of these rules are just plain bizarre. In ancient China, for example, there was a law that prohibited people from getting tattoos, with those caught facing serious punishment. Today, tattoos are a symbol of personal expression, but back then, they were seen as a sign of rebellion. Let's dive into some specific ancient rules from different cultures. In ancient Egypt, there was a law that prohibited people from eating onions or garlic before attending a religious ceremony. And if you broke this rule, you'd be seen as impure, someone who didn't respect the gods. In ancient Babylon, there was a law that dictated how people should handle business transactions. If a merchant failed to deliver goods on time, he'd be forced to pay a hefty fine. Can you imagine having to pay a fine just for being late with a delivery? It's crazy to think about, but for the Babylonians, this was just a part of doing business. One ancient rule that really stands out is the Spartan law that prohibited men from marrying before the age of 30. Can you imagine being forced to wait until you're 30 just to get married? And if you broke this rule, you'd be seen as a threat to national security. But perhaps the most outrageous law I came across is the ancient Sumerian law that prohibited people from singing in the streets. Can you imagine having to abstain from singing just because you're in a public place? And if you broke this rule, you'd be seen as a troublemaker, someone who didn't respect the authorities. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this journey through some of the wildest ancient rules out there. It's amazing to see just how far society has come in terms of personal freedoms and rights. I mean, can you imagine living in a world where you're not allowed to sing in the streets or get married before the age of 30? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to share your favorite ancient rule in the comments below. And if you want to explore more weird laws, check out our video on modern laws that are just as strange.